1936. By fire's glow, shadows revealed their names. In July 1936, Madrid's air sizzled with radio and dust. On the Gran Via, a station in a former cinema kept the city awake. A microphone lashed to a broomstick, a turntable with a cracked rubber mat, a slogan where the screen had been "No pasarán," lettered as if a wall could speak. As shells began to feel like weather, engineers learned to splice with kitchen knives and prayer. Announcers wrote time and temperature on ration cards. A violinist kept his case open for luck and found only cigarette ends. After midnight, the city's noise thinned. The transmitter hummed in a key that makes teeth ache. The aerial shivered like a tuning fork that had learned politics. Down in basements, sets glowed in front of families sleeping under coats. Then, between a weather bulletin and a poem, the board lit itself. No switch moved. The meters rose the way fever does. What came through was not quite a voice. It was cadence. Breath turned to static, syllables fraying where they should have joined. A string of names tumbled clear: Teresa, Miguel, a surname that could not decide on Z or S, and a date that had not happened yet. The announcer reached for the mic and did not speak. Whatever this was had no use for men. They cut shellac in the dark. When the reel ended, the studio clock had skipped 2 minutes, a trespass small enough to deny by dawn. Morning resumed its appetite. Bread queues, sandbags, a fountain coughing dust. The disc went into a sleeve marked interference. A pencil added a smaller word that nobody owned: names. San Lorenzo became a hospital by the logic of war. Pews stacked like lumber, saints wrapped in brown paper, a red cross painted over a fresco that once forgave. Windows wore plywood, light came through where glass remembered. The sacristy kept morphine under a chalice veil. Orderlies rinsed bandages in the marble font and did not look at their reflections. One door remained locked, the narrow stair to the bells. Nobody had a key. Nobody asked. Nights, the shelling counted for us. Between salvos, the building learned to breathe, old timbers exhaling sap, mortar cooling with a click like teeth. A nurse chalked a list on the stair door. Men whose tags had been lost, names gathered the way a net gathers what the river chooses. At dawn, the chalk had smudged into columns finer than her hand, as if the wood had practiced penmanship while the city kept watch. Rumor liked small rooms. A boy heard bells without a rope. One long, two short, the code of a distant fire brigade. A surgeon with a mapmaker's patience sat with his back to the door and plotted impacts on squared paper. His pencil shook, then learned the cadence. Just before morning, the plank cooled against his spine, a draft rising as if a stair had opened in sleep. They never forced the lock. There are economies even in war. The list grew, narrowed, grew again as trains delivered strangers to pallets and took others away under flags no one saluted. After the front moved, parishioners returned with dustpans and hymns. The first sweep revealed the ghost of the chalk and the grain, thin white threads like veins. The sacristan wet his thumb to wipe them, then paused as if afraid to smear a page already signed. Photographs make promises the eye cannot keep. In a basement of Calle del Leon, a young reporter strung negatives like black pennants and stirred trays that smelled of vinegar and escape. He had spent the afternoon at a barricade where mattresses learned masonry and boys learned steadiness. Faces offered their bravest halves. The shutter obliged. Under the red lamp, the images came up, silver finding its story in paper's milk. First frame, a woman lifting a kettle for a sentry, steam the color of mercy. Second, a militiaman grinning with a cigarette like punctuation. Third, the long shot down the street, sunlight clipped into hard coins by shattered cornices. He rocked the tray, waiting for corners to darken. Then the shadows arrived, not the black in ruined windows, but shapes where no face had stood. They were not quite forms, more ink with opinions. At the sandbag's left, a shoulder leaned where there had been only plaster. Beside the kettle, a hand hovered, palm up as if weighing heat. In the long shot, a gap learned to resemble a mouth, and then, politely, a name. Angel, or perhaps only an A that wished to continue. He checked notes, plates, tripod marks. He developed a second strip from the same hour. The shadows kept their posts like troops that had read the order early. He carried the prints to the editor, who kept his coat buttoned like an argument. The editor peered, sighed, and chose the frame with the cigarette because it looked like courage and would not invite letters signed A Patriot. The rest went into a folder labeled To Do. Years later, when the basement flooded, the folder lifted and drifted like a small convoy until a janitor fetched it with a broom. The shadows, water-wrinkled, retained their opinions. In the long shot, the mouth finally closed. Jarama taught both banks the same song. The river cut the front like a sentence. Olive groves held their breath for weeks. At night, the stars behaved like civilians and did not take sides. Men dug with spoons when spades rang too loud. Someone hummed an old lullaby, first on the Republican bank, then on the Nationalist, and the melody ferried itself across water. Shots paused. Breath cannot do both things for long. Voices go farther at night. They rub against air cooled by regret and pick up polish. The lullaby thickened into harmony no sergeant had ordered. Foreigners shaped the vowels and were forgiven. A medic noted a boy died smiling because somebody remembered the second verse. On the third week, a new line joined the tune. Separate, low, a woman's thread sung as if from the trees. She did not know the words and did not need them. Each side did its own arithmetic. One called her a mother, the other a saint. Unbelievers called it air. A mule stamped. The river turned like a patient who wants to sleep but cannot. At dawn, no woman stood among the olives. Prints crossed the bank, then faded at the waterline. A corporal found 3 long hairs caught in bark where only boys had slept. He wound them round a button and later swore nothing bad happened to him again until after the war, which is how men bless what frightens them. The lullaby returned on other nights and then did not. When the front moved, the trees forgot the pitch but kept the rhythm, leaves answering wind in the old meter. He carried 3 books, a pocket New Testament, a Spanish grammar, and a ledger he called a journal, though it mostly recorded debts and addresses. He was 22 and wrote small to save paper. His mother's first letter lives between pages 10 and 11, a pressed exclamation. He joined at Albacete with a Dublin friend who sang softly, and a Parisian who called everyone camarade because names are heavy in a foreign mouth. The early pages are training and weather, dust like flour, boots like coffins, rifles older than recruits. Then Jarama replaces grammar. He writes one clear account of a charge that stopped too soon and one muddy account of a night that ran too long. He notes a kindness, a stranger's orange, a tin cup of wine carried back farther than the giver could walk, and writes the dead in a line that refuses punctuation. On a day without date, a shell took most of him and left a shirt pocket intact. The journal fell open where he had guessed the lullaby's words and guessed wrong. A comrade gathered the book, the coins, and a dress for a Camden town tailor. Weeks later, in Valencia, a nurse wrapped the ledger in paper and sent it toward the coast with a convoy that would itself be bombed and therefore legendary in 2 neighborhoods. His mother opened it in October. Beneath her son's last line, another sentence had appeared in faint pencil, the writing careful and un-English. Tell her the song crossed. No date, no place. The postmark is bad weather. A priest, a union steward, and a reporter each said kindnesses and could not explain the hand. She placed the ledger in a drawer under aprons and left it there for a war and a wedding. Years later, a grandson read the penciled line and understood that some mail travels by melody. When the guns fell quiet, paint got busy. Courtyards were whitewashed, bullet holes taught to be freckles. Slogans went under lime the way bones go under soil. A street was renamed and then renamed again. Doorbells learned to forget. But walls keep breath. On summer nights, new tenants heard boots pause on a landing where no stair creaked. Winter windows filmed from the inside as if someone had spoken and been modest about warmth. At the cemetery, a cypress made a green shade that convinced families to whisper. A mason pointed with his trowel. Here the ground rings dull. Here it rings like a cupboard with something behind. Paperwork had learned other priorities. A clerk practiced a shrug that meant we are sorry and also busy. A baker's daughter, who sold candles at the gate, sometimes arranged them in a line that matched the cadence of names no one read aloud. The camera learned discretion. Photographs from fiestas came back with a corner fogged like breath. A bridal portrait showed a faint hand on a shoulder where no aunt had stood. A police station's clock, taken from a bombed school and proud of its second hand, lost 2 minutes on the same date each year and took them back slowly, a dog unsure whether a gesture means kindness. Whitewash dries to silence. Lime forgets with ceremony. Roofs practice the doctrine of rain. Still, on foggy dawns the old list returns, chalk thin as veins. On the door of a stair, nobody opens. Someone wipes it with a sleeve, and the chalk answers by being a little more stubborn next time. The house breathes the way houses breathe. The wall keeps its breath a little longer. Years later, fields were opened with brushes instead of shovels. Volunteers in paper suits read the ground like music. Measures of clay, rests of stone, a bone that remembered weight. They laid out names printed from archives and left room for those not yet found. Families arrived with photographs that bent like prayers from being folded. In one village, a spool of wire came up bright as a thought. In another, a ring that fit two sisters, and neither claimed it. In Madrid, the radio station, now glass and chrome, kept its old shellac in a back cupboard. The disc labeled interference went to a sound lab, where a stylus walked the groove like a pilgrim and brought back what Stairs had once heard. Cadence, names, a date that had not happened then, but had since. A technician took off his headphones and wrote the list as carefully as if it might sign for itself. The darkroom prints surfaced from a flood-stained folder and were scanned by a museum intern who knew better than to tidy shadows. The extra shoulder, the weighing hand, the mouth that had wished to finish the name, they all held still, patient as windows. A case label said, unknowns. Visitors leaned in and recognized the geometry of grief. On certain nights, beside newly opened earth, someone hums the old lullaby. No drum answers, no sergeant counts time. The song crosses anyway, air to ear to page, page to stone. A list is read, a wind goes through the olives, a button gleams where hair has curled itself like script. The living go home. The ground keeps time in a slower meter, the one that remembers shadows.